My name is Emily Hayes, and for most of my 26 years, I believed my future, especially my education, was set in stone, secured by a trust fund my grandmother lovingly established for me. That foundation shattered last year when I discovered my parents had systematically drained almost every penny to bankroll my sister Valerie's extravagant life. They thought I'd stay silent, to keep the peace, to preserve the family facade. They were wrong. What they never saw coming was the phone call from the bank manager that would turn their smug confidence into pure panic. Before I dive deeper, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand up to family betrayal, hit that like and subscribe button. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Unlike my parents, who inherited a comfortable life in a picturesque Seattle suburb, Grandma Eleanor built her success from nothing. She arrived in this country with next to nothing, worked multiple jobs, and eventually transformed a small artisanal coffee bean import business into a thriving company. "Never expect handouts, Emily," she'd tell me, her voice soft as we baked lavender shortbread in her cozy kitchen, rich with the scent of coffee and wisdom. But there's nothing wrong with giving someone you love a fighting chance. That fighting chance came when I turned 12. Grandma gathered our family for a special dinner where she announced she had set up educational trust funds for both Valerie and me. She'd allocated $150,000 for each of us, specifically to cover our college and graduate education. I remember the sparkle in her eyes when she looked at me and said, "Education is the one thing nobody can ever truly take from you." If only that had been true. Growing up in our spacious four-bedroom home overlooking Puget Sound, the contrast in how my parents, Robert and Susan Hayes, treated Valerie and me was subtle, yet constantly present. Both successful in their tech careers, they ensured we had everything we needed, but Valerie, just 2 years younger, always seemed to get everything she wanted. Valerie was blessed with my mother's striking beauty and my father's easy charm. She was the child who could melt my father's sternest look with a simple pout, or convince my mother to extend her curfew with a flutter of her long eyelashes. Meanwhile, I inherited Grandma Eleanor's practical nature and relentless determination. I was the responsible one, the planner, the achiever. "Emily's so self-sufficient," my mother would proudly tell her friends, which I soon learned was code for "Emily doesn't need our attention." When Valerie struggled in high school, our parents hired the most exclusive private tutors. When I needed new running shoes for track, Mom suggested I use my babysitting money, reasoning, "You value things more when you earn them yourself." The pattern continued. Valerie received a brand new electric SUV for her 16th birthday. I shared my mother's older sedan when she upgraded. Valerie jetted off to a luxury retreat in the Costa Rican rainforest for spring break. I worked as a lifeguard at the community pool. Don't misunderstand. I wasn't mistreated or neglected. Our home was comfortable, and my basic needs were always met. But the unspoken message was deafeningly clear. Valerie was special. I was capable. Despite these disparities, I excelled academically while Valerie consistently struggled to maintain a B average. I graduated at the top of my class and secured a partial scholarship to Pacific Coast University, a highly respected institution. My plan was to use a portion of my trust fund for undergraduate expenses and meticulously save the rest for graduate school. Throughout college, I called Grandma Eleanor every Sunday. She became more than a grandmother. She was my unwavering mentor and dearest friend. When I'd voice my frustrations about my parents' blatant favoritism, she would listen without judgment, always encouraging me to forge my own distinct path. "Some people need to be carried through life," she once told me. "You, my darling, have legs of steel. You'll go wherever you want to go." During my junior year, Grandma Eleanor was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The disease moved swiftly, and despite the best treatments, we lost her just 4 months later. At her funeral, standing between my parents, I felt a profound emptiness that I knew would never truly heal. In her will, Grandma Eleanor solemnly reaffirmed the educational trusts she had established for Valerie and me. She left her modest, beloved home to my parents and several cherished personal items to each of us. I received her collection of vintage books, her exquisite pearl earrings, and a handwritten letter I keep in my nightstand drawer to this day. "My dearest Emily," she wrote, "education transformed my life, and I know it will open every door for you. The funds I've set aside are my investment in your beautiful mind and determined spirit. Use them well, and remember that I believe in you without reservation." I graduated from Pacific Coast University with honors, working part-time throughout to minimize my withdrawals from the trust. I had preserved most of it for graduate school, where I planned to pursue a master's degree in human-centered design. Grandma would have been so proud of my careful planning and academic success. Little did I know that while I was meticulously budgeting every hour and dollar, working 20 hours a week alongside my demanding studies, my parents had already begun dismantling the future Grandma Eleanor had so carefully secured for me. After receiving my acceptance letter to the highly competitive human-centered design program at the Ivy Institute, I called my parents immediately, my heart bursting with joy. Mom answered, and I could hear the pride in her voice as I shared the news. "That's wonderful, honey, though I'm not surprised. You've always been so dedicated to your studies." "Thanks, Mom. I'll need to access my trust fund now to pay the tuition deposit. Can we meet with the bank this week?" There was a slight, almost imperceptible pause before she responded. "Oh, well, your father handles all of that. Let me check his schedule and get back to you." 3 days passed without any return call. When I tried again, Dad answered, sounding oddly rushed. "Emily, congratulations on Ivy. Listen, there's some paperwork we need to sort out with the trust. The bank has been difficult about disbursements lately, bureaucracy, you know how it is. Give us a few weeks to straighten it all out." Something in his tone struck me as off, but I had no reason to suspect anything truly wrong. I had withdrawn money from the trust before without any complications. Still, I gave them the benefit of the doubt and focused on wrapping up my undergraduate projects. 2 weeks later, my sister Valerie called, bubbling with unrestrained excitement. "Emily, you'll never believe it. Blake proposed last night." Valerie and Blake had been dating for just over a year. He worked in venture capital and came from old money, though Valerie had recently mentioned he had left his job to pursue entrepreneurial aspirations in the wellness tech space. "That's great, Valerie. Congratulations," I said, genuinely happy for her despite our complicated relationship. "You have to see the ring. It's 4 carats, pear-shaped. Blake says it's almost flawless." I did some quick mental math. A ring like that would easily cost $30,000 or more. Wow, that's quite an investment. I thought Blake was between jobs right now. "Oh, he's starting his own tech company. Mom and Dad think it's a brilliant idea. They're helping us get started." That comment didn't register as significant until the following weekend when I visited home and noticed a gleaming, brand new electric Suva high-end model in the driveway. Inside, Valerie was showing our parents' brochures for exclusive destination wedding venues in Bali. "Is that a new car?" I asked, gesturing toward the driveway. Valerie flipped her perfectly highlighted hair. "Isn't it gorgeous? I needed something reliable for commuting to the new apartment. New apartment in the city. Blake and I just signed the lease. It's a penthouse loft downtown. You should see the views. Anyway, we're thinking 80 guests for the engagement party. Intimate but special." As the afternoon wore on, I learned more about Valerie's suddenly upgraded lifestyle. The 2-week luxury spiritual retreat planned for Sedona, the acclaimed interior designer hired for the new loft, the private chef booked for the engagement party. For someone whose fiancé was between jobs and whose part-time work at a boutique couldn't possibly fund such extravagance, the math simply wasn't adding up. That evening, I approached my parents in the kitchen as they prepared dinner. "Mom, Dad, I still need to arrange accessing my trust fund for Ivy. The deposit deadline is coming up." They exchanged a quick, furtive glance that made my stomach tighten. "We're still working on that, sweetheart," Mom said, suddenly very interested in dicing an onion. I don't understand what's taking so long. Can I just go to the bank myself? I am 26 now. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother and I are still co-trustees. The way Grandma set it up, we need to approve major withdrawals until you're 30. This was completely new information to me. That doesn't sound right. I've accessed it before for tuition. Yes, well, smaller amounts were pre-approved. This is different. I looked between them, noticing how neither would meet my eyes. Then I decided to ask what had been bothering me all day. Are you helping Valerie with all these new expenses? The car, the apartment, the wedding plans? Mom brightened, seemingly relieved by the change of subject. Valerie and Blake are starting their lives together. It's an important time for them. So, you're giving them money? We're helping them establish themselves, Dad said firmly. They have big plans. And my education isn't a big plan. I felt my voice rising. Ivy's tuition is due in 3 weeks. I need to know if I can count on the trust fund Grandma set up specifically for my education. Don't be dramatic, Emily. Mom sighed. You've always found a way to make things work. You have your scholarship and savings. Valerie needs more support right now. The conversation ended there, but my concerns were just beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. The luxury SUV, the expensive loft, the elaborate wedding plans, none of it aligned with Valerie and Blake's actual income. And my parents' evasiveness about my trust fund sent deafening warning bells clanging in my mind. The next morning, I drove to my local branch of Sterling National Bank, where both trust accounts had been established. I requested a meeting with the manager, prepared to use my status as beneficiary to at least get some information. The bank couldn't tell me much without my parents' authorization, but I learned 2 crucial things. Yes, I was still the named beneficiary, and yes, there had been significant account activity in the past year. The customer service representative suggested I return with my parents to discuss further details. As I drove back to my small apartment near campus, anxiety gnawed at me. Ivy's deposit deadline loomed closer. My savings wouldn't cover even the first semester's tuition. Student loans were an option, but Grandma Eleanor had specifically established the trust to prevent educational debt. I called my parents every day that week. Each time they had a new excuse. Dad was traveling for work, the bank needed additional documentation, they were consulting with their financial advisor. The pattern was clear, they were stalling. Meanwhile, Valerie's Instagram filled with photos of her shopping sprees, her new loft's renovation, cake tastings, and venue tours. Each image felt like a personal assault, especially when she posted about the amazing European design tour our parents had surprised her and Blake with as an engagement gift. By the 3rd week of evasive responses from my parents, I knew something was seriously wrong. I made an appointment to meet with Mr. Sterling, the bank manager at the main branch where Grandma had established the trusts. I didn't tell my parents about the meeting. Something told me I needed to understand what was happening before confronting them again. My hands trembled as I parked outside the imposing brick building. Whatever I discovered inside would either calm my growing fears or confirm them. Either way, I couldn't continue in this limbo of uncertainty and suspicion. It was time to learn the truth about my future. I smoothed my skirt nervously as Mr. Sterling reviewed the account information on his computer screen. He was in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the professional demeanor of someone who had delivered both good and bad financial news countless times. Miss Hayes, as the beneficiary, you are entitled to certain information. He began, his tone carefully neutral. However, as your parents are still the co-trustees until your 30th birthday, they retain significant control over disbursements and management. I understand, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I just need to know if there are sufficient funds available for my graduate program tuition. The first payment is due in less than 2 weeks. Mr. Sterling removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture that made my heart sink before he even spoke. Miss Hayes, Emily, I'm afraid I have concerning information to share with you. Your educational trust currently holds a balance of $3,782.14. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. That's impossible. There should be over $100,000 remaining. He turned his monitor so I could see the screen. The account has experienced significant withdrawal activity over the past 24 months. Here's the transaction history. The list of withdrawals sprawled down the screen like accusatory fingers. $20,000 transferred 6 months ago, $35,000 withdrawn last summer. $25,000 withdrawn 3 months ago, smaller withdrawals of $5,000 to $10,000 scattered throughout. Who authorized these? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. All withdrawals were authorized by the co-trustees, Robert and Susan Hayes. The funds were transferred primarily to 2 accounts, a joint account held by your parents and an individual account under the name of Valerie Hayes. My grandmother's money. My educational future. It had been systematically drained to fund my sister's lavish lifestyle. The car, the penthouse loft, the Bali wedding plans, the seed money for Blake's wellness tech venture. It all made sickening, horrifying sense now. Were these withdrawals designated for educational purposes? I asked, remembering that Grandma had specifically established the trust for education. Mr. Sterling hesitated. The trust was indeed created with educational intent. However, as co-trustees, your parents have certain discretionary powers. But the money was meant for my education. I insisted, my voice cracking. My grandmother wanted to ensure I could complete my graduate studies without debt. I understand, and I sympathize with your situation. Miss Sterling said gently. These are sensitive matters, especially within families. Tears welled in my eyes, but I fought them back. I wouldn't break down in this mahogany-paneled office in front of a man who saw financial betrayals every day. But this wasn't just about money. It was about my grandmother's wishes being disregarded, about my parents' blatant favoritism, about my future being sacrificed for Valerie's comfort. I remembered Grandma Eleanor's words when she announced the trust. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take from you. She had been wrong. They had taken it, or at least they had taken the means to obtain it. Is there anything I can do? I asked finally, hating how small my voice sounded. Mr. Sterling looked thoughtful. Let me review the original trust documentation more thoroughly. Sometimes there are provisions or clauses that might be relevant to your situation. Could you return tomorrow afternoon? Let me review the original trust documentation. I nodded mechanically, thanked him, and walked out of the bank into the bright spring sunshine that seemed to mock my darkened prospects. Once inside my car, the tears came in violent waves. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and let the sobs rack my body until I could barely breathe. Images of Grandma Eleanor flooded my mind. Her proud smile at my high school graduation, her unwavering belief in my potential, her carefully planned financial gift that was meant to secure my future. How would she feel knowing her hard-earned money had been diverted from its intended purpose? The physical symptoms of distress overwhelmed me. Nausea rising in my throat, pressure building in my chest, a pounding headache forming behind my eyes. I fumbled for my phone and called in sick to my part-time job at the university library. Then I drove home in a fog of disbelief and betrayal. In my cramped studio apartment, I collapsed onto my bed, still in my interview clothes. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from my mother, but I couldn't talk to her. Not yet. Not until I processed what I had learned and decided what to do next. The practical implications were staggering. Without the trust fund, Ivy seemed impossible. Student loans would saddle me with debt for decades. Deferring admission would mean losing my spot in the competitive program. My carefully constructed plans were disintegrating before my eyes, but beyond the practical concerns was the emotional devastation. My own parents had chosen Valerie's luxuries over my education. They had betrayed not only me but also Grandma Eleanor's explicit wishes. They had done it systematically, over months, making deliberate decisions each time they transferred funds. And they had lied to me, not just once in a moment of weakness, but repeatedly, creating elaborate excuses to hide their actions. How many times had I called about the trust fund, only to be told that paperwork was pending or that the bank was being difficult? All lies, designed to stall until I discovered the truth on my own. As the shock began to subside, another emotion surfaced. Rage. Pure, justifiable anger that burned away my tears and straightened my spine. I sat up and took deep breaths, trying to think clearly through the haze of betrayal. I would confront them, yes, but not over the phone, not in a barrage of angry texts. I would look them in the eyes when they tried to explain why they had stolen my future to pay for Valerie's designer wedding gown and Blake's unproven startup dreams. My mother called again. This time, I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her cheerful message asking if I'd made any progress with Ivy's financial aid office. The casual deception in her voice fueled my resolve. "Not yet, Mom," I whispered to the empty room after the message ended. "But I'm about to make progress on something else entirely." Sunday dinners had been a Hayes family tradition for as long as I could remember. Even during college, I would try to make the hour-long drive home at least once a month for Mom's roasted salmon and Dad's artisanal cocktails. This Sunday, I arrived unannounced, knowing they would be home and likely entertaining Valerie and Blake. I stood on the porch of my childhood home, my heart hammering against my ribs, my rehearsed confrontation speech evaporating from my mind. Through the dining room window, I could see them already seated around the table, my parents, Valerie and Blake, laughing over filled wine glasses. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. Mom answered, surprise and delighting her features before she registered my expression. "Emily, we weren't expecting you. Is everything okay?" "No, Mom. Everything is not okay." She faltered but recovered quickly. "Well, come in. We're just starting dinner. I can set another place." I followed her to the dining room where Dad stood to greet me with a hug I couldn't return. "There's my girl. This is a nice surprise." Valerie waved from her seat, her pear-shaped engagement ring catching the light as she moved her hand. "Emily, perfect timing. I was just showing Mom and Dad the custom-designed invitations I've picked for the Bali wedding." I remained standing as they all watched me expectantly. "I went to the bank," I said quietly. "I spoke with Mr. Sterling about my trust fund." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Dad's smile faded. Mom busied herself with the salad bowl. Only Valerie and Blake appeared unaffected. "Perhaps we should discuss this after dinner," Dad suggested, his voice tight. We're going to discuss it now." I pulled out the account statement I had requested from Mr. Sterling. "Would someone like to explain why there's only $3,000 left in the educational trust that Grandma established for me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Blake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Valerie examined her manicure. Dad cleared his throat. "Emily, financial matters are complicated. Your mother and I made certain decisions based on the family's overall needs." "The family's needs?" I interrupted. "Or Valerie's wants? Because I'm looking at withdrawals that coincide perfectly with her new electric SUV, her penthouse loft, and what I assume is seed money for Blake's business venture." Mom finally spoke, her voice unnaturally high. "Emily, darling, you've always been so independent and resourceful. You have your scholarship, and you're so good at finding opportunities. Valerie needs more support to establish herself." "Support?" I echoed in disbelief. "You emptied a trust fund that Grandma explicitly created for my education to buy Valerie a luxury car and fund her wedding? We're helping both our daughters in different ways," Dad said firmly. "Valerie needed help launching her adult life. You needed help with education. We've provided for both of you according to your needs. Except you've spent my educational funds on her adult life," I pointed out, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Ivy's tuition is due in 10 days. What exactly is your plan for that?" My parents exchanged desperate glances. "We thought perhaps you could defer for a year," Mom suggested, her tone shockingly casual. "Work full-time, save up, or perhaps consider a less expensive program." The casual way she dismissed my dreams made me physically ill. A less expensive program than the one I worked 4 years to qualify for? The one Grandma specifically saved to help me attend. Valerie finally spoke up, her tone defensive. It's not like you're being left with nothing, Emily. You always figure things out. And my wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. And my education is what? A hobby? An optional extra? I turned back to my parents. Did either of you consider that what you did might be illegal? That trust was established for my education, not for Valerie's luxury purchases. Dad's expression hardened. Now you listen here, young lady. As trustees, your mother and I have discretion over those funds until you turn 30. We made decisions we felt were in the best interest of both our daughters. How is leaving me unable to pay my tuition in my best interest? You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be, Mom said, reaching for my hand, which I pulled away instantly. We're a family. We support each other. Sometimes that means making sacrifices. Sacrifices? I laughed bitterly. What exactly has Valerie sacrificed? Valerie stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I didn't ask them to give me the money, Emily. Don't blame me for this. Did you know where the money was coming from? I asked her directly. Her silence was answer enough. Blake, looking increasingly uncomfortable, spoke for the first time. Look, Emily, I understand you're upset, but Valerie and I are building a future together. My company has real potential. Once we're established, maybe we can help with your schooling. The condescension in his tone was the final straw. I don't want your charity. I want what Grandma intended me to have. Enough. Dad's voice boomed across the table, making the silverware jump. Emily, I understand you're disappointed, but what's done is done. The money has been spent. Continuing this discussion won't change anything except to create a rift in this family. The rift is already there, Dad. You and Mom created it the moment you decided Valerie's wedding was more important than my education. Mom began to cry, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. Please, Emily, can't we just enjoy our dinner as a family? We can discuss financial options for your schooling later. I looked around the table at my father's stern disapproval, my mother's manipulative tears, Valerie's defensive posture, and Blake's barely concealed annoyance. These people had betrayed me, and now they wanted to sweep it under the rug over roasted salmon and asparagus. I need to know exactly how you plan to make this right, I said, looking directly at my father. His expression told me everything before he even spoke. Emily, be reasonable. The money is gone. Your mother and I can't magically replace $150,000. So that's it? You took my future, handed it to Valerie, and now I'm supposed to just accept that? What we expect, Dad said, his voice dangerously low, is for you to be a member of this family and understand that sometimes individual desires need to be subordinated to the greater good. The greater good? I repeated incredulously. How is Valerie's destination wedding the greater good? That's enough. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. If you persist with this attitude, Emily, you leave us no choice. Either you accept the situation and move forward harmoniously as part of this family, or you can continue this selfish crusade and find yourself without our support in any form. The ultimatum hung in the air like a toxic cloud. They were threatening to cut me off completely if I didn't quietly accept their betrayal. So, those are my options? Forgive the theft of my education fund or be disowned. Don't be so dramatic. Valerie sighed. No one's disowning anyone. Just stop making everyone feel terrible about trying to help me. I looked at each of them one last time, memorizing their expressions in this moment of chilling clarity. Grandma would be ashamed of all of you. I walked out without another word, ignoring my mother's calls to come back, my father's warning that I would regret my emotional reaction, and Valerie's accusation that I was just jealous of her happiness. In my car, the full weight of the confrontation crashed over me. Not only had they taken my educational fund, but they had also made it abundantly clear that I would receive no further support, emotional or financial, if I refused to accept their decision. I was truly on my own. Tears blurred my vision as I pulled away from the curb. I made it only a few blocks before I had to pull over, overcome by the magnitude of the betrayal. Sobs wrenched from deep within my chest as years of subtle neglect crystallized into this final, undeniable evidence that I would always be secondary in my parents' hearts. I fumbled for my phone and called the only person I could think of who might understand. My friend Chloe, who had supported me through Grandma Eleanor's death. "Can I come over?" I managed between sobs. "Everything's falling apart." "I'll put on coffee," she said without hesitation, "and I'll find the emergency chocolate." As I drove toward Chloe's apartment, I tried to imagine what Grandma Eleanor would advise me to do. She had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles with grace and determination. She wouldn't want me to give up on my dreams or my principles. "I won't let them win," I whispered to myself as I parked outside Chloe's building. "I don't know how yet, but I will find a way forward that honors your intentions, Grandma. I promise." 4 days after the disastrous family dinner, I was sitting in my apartment, surrounded by student loan applications and alternative graduate program brochures, when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Sterling National Bank. "Hello, Miss Hayes. This is Richard Sterling from Sterling National Bank. I've been reviewing your grandmother's trust documentation more thoroughly, and I've discovered some information that I believe you should be aware of. Could you come to the bank today?" His tone conveyed urgency, but also something else, a hint of vindication that made my heart race. "I'll be there in an hour." I arrived at the bank to find Mr. Sterling waiting with a thick folder and a serious expression. He ushered me into his private office and closed the door before speaking. "Miss Hayes, after our conversation last week, something didn't sit right with me. Your grandmother, Eleanor, was a remarkably thorough woman who understood both business and human nature. It seemed unlikely to me that she would create educational trusts without specific provisions to ensure the funds were used as intended." He opened the folder to reveal documents I hadn't seen before. I had our records department pull the original trust agreement from deep storage, including all annexes and amendments. What I found is quite significant. Mr. Sterling proceeded to explain that Grandma Eleanor had indeed included several critical clauses that my parents had either overlooked or deliberately ignored. First, all withdrawals from the educational trusts were specifically required to be for educational purposes. Any other use constituted a violation of the trust terms. Second, the trust required annual audits to verify appropriate use of funds, a requirement that had apparently been neglected for the past 3 years. Third, and most importantly, the trust included a clawback provision, allowing the bank, as the trust administrator, to recover funds that were misappropriated contrary to the trust's educational purpose. Fourth, in the event of mismanagement by the trustees, the beneficiary could petition for immediate control of the remaining assets, regardless of age restrictions. "Your grandmother was protecting you, Miss Hayes," Mr. Sterling said, his professional demeanor softening. "She anticipated potential problems and built safeguards into the trust agreement." Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in days. "So what does this mean, practically speaking?" "It means that the withdrawals your parents made for your sister's car, apartment, wedding expenses, and her fiancé's business venture were in direct violation of the trust terms. As the bank's trust officer, I have both the authority and the obligation to investigate this misuse of funds." He explained that the bank's legal department had already initiated a review based on the irregular withdrawal patterns. The large transfers had automatically triggered an internal flag, but without the beneficiary, me, raising concerns, the investigation had been proceeding slowly. "Now that you've come forward, we can accelerate the process. The bank can potentially recover the misappropriated funds from your parents and your sister." The implications were staggering. My parents could be forced to repay all the money they had diverted to Valerie. But such action would undoubtedly destroy any remaining family relationship. This would mean legal proceedings, wouldn't it? I asked, torn between vindication and dread. Most likely, yes. Your parents would be formally notified of the trust violations and given an opportunity to voluntarily return the funds. If they refuse, the bank would need to take legal action to enforce the trust provisions. As the beneficiary, you would be a party to these proceedings. I sat in silence, absorbing the weight of this decision. Pursuing the recovery of my trust funds would mean publicly confronting my parents' betrayal. It would create a permanent rift in our family. Valerie would undoubtedly see me as vindictive and jealous. Extended family would take sides. But the alternative meant surrendering my educational future and allowing my parents and sister to benefit from their betrayal of both me and Grandma Eleanor's wishes. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Mr. Sterling nodded understanding. Of course. This is a significant decision with far-reaching implications. However, I should inform you that as the trust officer, I am obligated to report these violations to the bank's legal department regardless of your decision to participate. The recovery process may proceed even without your active involvement, although your participation would strengthen the case considerably. As I left the bank, my mind swirled with conflicting emotions. Hope that the money might be recovered, anxiety about the potential fallout, guilt about the impact on my family, and underlying everything, a burning sense of injustice that demanded resolution. I called Chloe and asked if we could meet for coffee. I needed a sounding board, someone who could help me think through all angles of this situation. At the coffee shop, Chloe listened attentively as I explained what Mr. Sterling had discovered. So let me get this straight, she said after I finished. Your grandmother specifically set up safeguards to prevent exactly what your parents did. The bank has the authority to recover the money, and you're still not sure if you should proceed. Put that way, my hesitation seemed foolish. It's my family, Chloe. Going through with this would mean possibly never speaking to my parents again. Emily, Chloe said gently, her eyes unwavering. They stole from you. They violated your grandmother's wishes. They chose Valerie's luxury over your education. And when confronted, they threatened to cut you off if you didn't quietly accept their betrayal. I know, but no buts. Would your grandmother want you to sacrifice your education to maintain peace with people who betrayed her intentions? The answer was immediately clear. Grandma Eleanor valued education above almost everything. She had worked tirelessly to create opportunities for herself and her family. She would be horrified to know her hard-earned money had been diverted from its intended purpose. More than that, Grandma had taught me about self-respect and standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. You're right, I said, straightening my shoulders. I need to see this through. Not just for my education, but because it's what Grandma would want. She put those safeguards in place for a reason. Chloe squeezed my hand. It won't be easy. Your parents and Valerie will try to make you feel like the villain in this story. But you're not. You're just holding them accountable for their actions. That evening, I called Mr. Sterling and informed him of my decision to actively participate in the recovery process. He promised to connect me with the bank's legal team and advised me to prepare for a challenging road ahead. Before hanging up, I asked him a question that had been nagging at me. Mr. Sterling, why are you helping me so directly with this? Isn't this beyond your normal duties as a bank manager? There was a pause before he answered. Your grandmother, Eleanor, was one of our most respected clients. She built her success through integrity and hard work. When she established these trusts, she told me personally how important they were to her, that her granddaughter's education was her legacy. Seeing those wishes disregarded so blatantly, well, let's just say I take my responsibilities as a trust officer very seriously. His words reinforced my resolve. This wasn't just about my future anymore. It was about honoring Grandma Eleanor's legacy and standing up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. As I prepared for bed that night, I took out the letter Grandma had left me and read it again. One line stood out with new significance. Remember that I believe in you without reservation. I won't let you down, Grandma, I whispered. No matter how difficult this gets, I'll see it through. The next morning, I met with Sarah Chen, an attorney specializing in trust litigation whom the bank had recommended. Her office projected competence and discretion, exactly what I needed for the battle ahead. Based on what Mr. Sterling has shared with me and my preliminary review of the trust documents, you have a very strong case, Miss Hayes, Sarah explained, her manner both professional and compassionate. Your grandmother created an ironclad educational trust with explicit protections against precisely what occurred. She outlined the process ahead. First, the bank would send formal notification to my parents detailing the trust violations and demanding repayment of misappropriated funds. My parents would have 30 days to respond. If they failed to repay or make acceptable arrangements, legal proceedings would commence. Be prepared, Sarah warned. Once your parents receive the bank's letter, they will likely reach out to you immediately. They may attempt to pressure you emotionally, manipulate you, or even threaten you. It's crucial that you direct all communication through my office from that point forward. She was right. 3 days later, my phone exploded with notifications. 12 missed calls from my mother, 8 from my father, and a barrage of texts ranging from confused, "What is this letter from the bank?" to angry, "How could you do this to your family?" to manipulative, "Your father is having chest pains from the stress you're causing." 2. Following Sarah's advice, I sent a single text to both parents. I've retained legal counsel regarding the misappropriation of my trust funds. Please direct all communication to Sarah Chen at Chen Legal Associates, followed by her contact information. The response was nuclear. Valerie called, screaming that I was trying to ruin her wedding and destroy her relationship with Blake. Mom left tearful voicemails, claiming I was tearing the family apart over just money. Dad sent a text stating that my actions had confirmed I no longer considered myself part of the Hayes family. Sarah helped me document all these communications while advising me not to respond directly. Every interaction now becomes potential evidence, she explained. Let them reveal their priorities and attitudes in their own words. Meanwhile, the bank's investigation gathered momentum. Financial records revealed the full extent of the diversion. $126,000 had been transferred from my educational trust over 2 years, primarily to fund Valerie's electric SUV. $38,000. Down payment on Valerie and Blake's loft, $40,000. Seed money for Blake's startup, $25,000. Valerie's engagement ring, $20,000. And deposits for Valerie's destination wedding, $15,000. The remaining funds had gone toward various luxury purchases, including Valerie's European design tour and shopping sprees. When confronted with this detailed accounting, my parents attempted to negotiate. They offered to repay $20,000 immediately and the remainder over 10 years. Terms that would make the money useless for my current educational needs. This is not a negotiation, Sarah responded firmly. The terms of the trust were violated, and the full amount must be restored within the timeframe specified by the bank. As the legal process intensified, so did the family pressure. Extended family members began taking sides. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, called to berate me for creating such drama until I calmly explained exactly what my parents had done with Grandma Eleanor's educational bequest. They did what? She asked, her tone shifting from accusatory to shocked. Eleanor specifically set that money aside for your education. I was there when she set up those trusts. Aunt Carol became an unexpected ally. She revealed that she'd experienced similar favoritism growing up. My mother had always been their parents' preferred daughter, receiving more attention, more opportunities, and more financial support. I always noticed how your parents treated Valerie differently, she admitted. But I never imagined they would go this far. Eleanor would be furious. Her support strengthened my resolve during the increasingly difficult weeks that followed. The bank froze the remaining assets in Valerie's personal accounts and my parents' joint accounts that had received trust funds, pending resolution of the case. This action triggered another round of outraged calls and messages. Valerie's wedding vendors were threatening to cancel without additional deposits. Blake's fledgling company was stalling without more investment. My parents faced potential financial penalties beyond just repaying the misappropriated funds. 2 months into the legal process, my parents' attorney requested a settlement meeting. Sarah advised me to attend but prepared me thoroughly. They will appeal to your emotions. They will try to make you feel responsible for their financial predicament. Remember that they created this situation, not you. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at Sarah's office building. My parents looked smaller somehow, defeated yet still indignant. Their attorney, an aggressive man with an expensive suit and dismissive manner, spoke first. My clients are willing to acknowledge certain irregularities in their management of the trust funds, he began, as though characterizing theft as an administrative oversight. They propose a settlement where they return $75,000 immediately, with the remaining amount forgiven in recognition of parental support they've provided over the years. Sarah's response was measured but firm. That proposal is unacceptable. The trust was not created to reimburse Mr. and Mrs. Hayes for fulfilling their basic parental obligations. It was specifically designated for Emily's education. We require full repayment of all misappropriated funds, plus interest at the rate specified in the trust document and legal fees incurred in recovery. My father leaned forward, his face flushed. Emily, be reasonable. This vindictive pursuit will bankrupt us. Is that what you want? To destroy your family over money? For the first time in my life, I saw through his manipulation clearly. This isn't about money, Dad. This is about honoring Grandma's wishes. This is about right and wrong. You and Mom made deliberate choices to prioritize Valerie's luxuries over my education. Now, you're facing the consequences of those choices. My mother began to cry, a tactic that had worked on me countless times before. We've always loved both our daughters equally. We were just trying to help Valerie establish herself. You've always been so capable, Emily. Being capable doesn't mean I deserve to have my future stolen. I replied calmly. Grandma believed in education. She wanted me to have the opportunities that her trust fund would provide. You betrayed both me and her. The meeting ended without resolution, but it marked a turning point. I walked out feeling stronger, clearer, and more certain that I was doing the right thing, not just for myself, but in honor of Grandma Eleanor's intentions. 3 weeks later, facing mounting legal costs and the prospect of a public court battle they would likely lose, my parents capitulated. They agreed to return the full amount, plus interest and legal fees. The money would come from refinancing their house, liquidating investments, and returning many of Valerie's luxury purchases. Valerie's wedding was downsized from a Bali extravaganza to a modest local ceremony. Blake's company had to seek legitimate investors rather than relying on my diverted education funds. The electric SUV was sold and replaced with a practical used vehicle. Throughout this period, I experienced waves of doubt and guilt, questioning whether I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. Chloe and Aunt Carol provided crucial emotional support, reminding me that holding people accountable for their actions wasn't cruel. It was necessary. What they did was financial abuse, Chloe pointed out during one of my moments of wavering. They used their position of trust to harm your future. Standing up for yourself isn't vindictive, it's healthy. The day the funds were restored to my educational trust, Mr. Sterling called personally to inform me. The full amount has been returned and secured, he told me, satisfaction evident in his voice. Your grandmother would be proud of how you've handled this difficult situation. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment looking at the restored trust account balance on my laptop screen, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for what had been irreparably broken. I had secured my educational future, but at the cost of my family relationships. My parents had made their position clear in a final email sent through their attorney. They considered my legal action an unforgivable betrayal of family loyalty. They would comply with the legal settlement but wished to have no further contact with me. Valerie's last text message was equally final. I hope your precious money keeps you warm at night instead of family. Don't contact me again. I closed my laptop and stood by my window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The path ahead would be lonely, but it would be honest. And for the first time in my life, I was walking it on my own terms, with my integrity intact. 2 years have passed since the trust funds were restored. I completed my master's degree in human-centered design at the Ivy Institute with honors, using the money exactly as Grandma Eleanor intended. The graduation ceremony was bittersweet. Aunt Carol attended, along with Chloe and other friends, but the seats where my parents and sister should have been remained painfully empty. The immediate aftermath of the legal battle was the hardest period of my life. Nightmares plagued my sleep. I questioned my decision constantly. The silence from my family felt like an amputation, a constant phantom pain where connection should be. 3 months after the settlement, I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Anya Sharma, who specialized in family trauma. She helped me understand that the trust fund situation was merely the culmination of lifelong patterns. What you're describing is a family system with a golden child and a scapegoat dynamic, she explained during one particularly insightful session. Your parents unconsciously assigned these roles to you and Valerie early on. The trust fund incident simply made these implicit roles explicit. Through therapy, I began to recognize how those family dynamics had shaped my self-perception. I was the one who always had to be strong, independent, and uncomplaining. I had internalized the message that my needs were secondary, that asking for what was rightfully mine was somehow selfish. Your parents taught you that love was conditional on accepting less than you deserved, Dr. Sharma noted. Breaking that pattern is painful, but necessary for your long-term well-being. Gradually, I built a new support network. Classmates who became friends, professors who became mentors, clients from my internship who reminded me daily why I had chosen this field. Chloe remained my steadfast rock, and Aunt Carol provided a crucial connection to family history without the toxic dynamics. 1 year after graduation, I used a portion of my remaining trust funds to establish a small scholarship at my undergraduate university, the Eleanor Hayes Educational Opportunity Grant. It provides financial assistance to students who, like me, are pursuing education despite family challenges. It's a small way of extending Grandma's legacy beyond just my own education. My professional life flourished as I began working with adolescents navigating family conflicts and educational transitions. My personal experience gave me unique insight into their struggles. There's a special satisfaction in helping young people recognize their own worth and advocate for their needs, skills I learned the hard way. I still think about my parents and Valerie almost daily. Last Christmas, I sent cards to both households. They were returned unopened. I've accepted that reconciliation may never come, though I've left that door cracked open should they ever choose to walk through it with genuine accountability. The unexpected opportunity to test that possibility came 8 months ago when my paternal grandfather passed away. At the funeral, I saw my family for the first time since the trust fund battle. My father acknowledged me with a stiff nod. My mother couldn't meet my eyes. Valerie, visibly pregnant, stayed across the room. As we filed out of the chapel, however, Valerie approached me in the vestibule. Her expression was unreadable as she stopped before me. "Your hair is different," she said, an oddly mundane observation given our circumstances. "Yes," I replied, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected interaction. "Congratulations on the baby." She nodded, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "Blake's company failed. He took off 6 months ago." Her voice was flat, devoid of the animation that had always characterized her speech. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" she asked, finally meeting my eyes directly. "Sorry?" I mean, the question hung between us, layered with unspoken history. Was I sorry her carefully constructed life had fallen apart? Was I sorry the man our parents had diverted my education funds to support had abandoned her? Was I experiencing the vindication some might expect? "Yes," I answered truthfully. "I never wanted you to be unhappy, Valerie. I just needed to stand up for what was right." Something flickered across her face. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps recognition. Mom and Dad sold the house. They're in a condo now, she paused. I'm back in the spare room until after the baby comes. We didn't hug, we didn't promise to call. But as she turned to leave, she said quietly, "You look well, Emily. I'm glad Ivy worked out for you." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement. The first crack in the wall of silence. Standing at Grandma Eleanor's grave after the funeral, I reflected on everything that had transpired since her passing. The betrayal and loss had transformed me in ways both painful and profound. I had discovered reserves of strength I never knew I possessed. I had learned to value myself, even when those who should have valued me most did not. "You were right, Grandma," I whispered to the granite headstone. "Education is transformative. Just not only in the ways you expected. The most important lessons hadn't come from textbooks or professors. They had come from standing firm in the face of manipulation, from recognizing that sometimes love requires difficult boundaries, from understanding that true family, whether bound by blood or by choice, never asks you to sacrifice your fundamental needs and dignity for acceptance." I placed white roses on her grave and made a silent promise to continue honoring her legacy, not just through my education and career, but through living with the integrity and self-respect she had modeled. As I walked back through the cemetery, autumn leaves crunching beneath my feet, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for so long. The path forward remained uncertain, but I was walking it on my own terms, with hard-won wisdom guiding each step. Family might be our first community, but it needn't be our only one. Sometimes, the most valuable gift we can give ourselves is the courage to recognize when those who should nurture us have become those who harm us, and the strength to create boundaries that protect our dignity and potential. That isn't selfishness or vindictiveness. It's self-preservation. It's growth. It's the necessary foundation for building a life of authenticity and purpose. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping peace and standing up for what's right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful growth. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and self-discovery. And remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's often the first step toward becoming who you're meant to be. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to honor your worth in every relationship that shapes your life.